The candle had burned down to nothing by the time Kate realized no one was coming. She sat at the edge of the narrow bed in the east wing of Harrow Hall, still dressed in her traveling clothes, her hands folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. The room smelled of cold stone and old lavender, the kind of scent that clings to places where people are kept rather than welcomed. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like something breathing. She had been waiting for 3 hours. Edmund had promised her 2. "I'll meet you before supper," he had said, pressing his lips to her knuckles with that easy smile she had spent 4 years believing in. "Don't worry, Kate. Everything is arranged. Everything was arranged." She repeated it to herself now like a prayer going stale. The wedding was in 4 days. The contracts had been signed. Her father's estate, what remained of it after his illness had swallowed the better part of 2 years, had already been transferred into the Voss family's stewardship. Edmund's family. Her future family. She had given them everything ahead of the ceremony because Edmund had asked her to, gently, reasonably, with that patient tone he used when he wanted her to feel foolish for hesitating. She had not hesitated. That, she thought now, was the thing she would never forgive herself for. A sound in the corridor pulled her upright. Low voices, not servants, not the shuffling of a night steward. Men's voices, close and careful. She crossed to the door on instinct and pressed her ear against the cold wood. She doesn't suspect anything. Edmund's voice. Flat, stripped of warmth, nothing like the voice she knew. She'd better not. A second man, older. She recognized it after a moment. Lord Voss, Edmund's father. The signing must happen before the ceremony. Once the Ashford name is legally dissolved into ours, it doesn't matter what she knows. And after? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to change everything. "There are convents in the Northern Territories," Lord Voss said. "Remote ones. She'll be well cared for. She simply won't be coming back." Kate stopped breathing. "She has no wolf," Edmund said, and the casualness in it, the complete, unbothered casualness, hit her somewhere below the ribs. "No pack, no alpha, no bloodline worth protecting. No one will ask questions. She's an Omega without a bond. Legally, after the ceremony, she belongs to us. See that she stays calm until then. She's skittish. She trusts me." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. "She trusts me," said not with guilt, not with grief, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had used a tool well. Kate stepped back from the door. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and looked at the room. The narrow bed, the cold hearth, the single trunk that held everything she owned. She had come here with her whole life packed into that trunk. She had come here believing she was about to begin something. She had come here to be buried. The thought arrived not with panic, but with a terrible, clarifying calm. She had no wolf. That was true. Whatever gift the moon had given to others of her kind had passed her by entirely. No shift, no inner voice, no bond. She had grown up in the Ashford house hiding it, and she had spent the last 4 years hiding it from Edmund too, telling herself it didn't matter, that a good marriage would protect her, that love was enough. Edmund had known from the beginning. He had found her precisely because of it. She did not let herself cry. There was no time for it. She pulled her traveling cloak from the trunk, the gray wool one, heavy and plain, nothing that would identify her as an Ashford, and she braided her hair quickly with fingers that only trembled once. She took the small leather purse hidden in the lining of her second boot. She took the folded letter from her brother Eli, the one she had read so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. She left everything else. The window faced the kitchen garden, 1 floor down, stone ledge, then a drop into dark soil she could smell from here. Damp earth, iron cold, the green bitterness of winter herbs still clinging to their beds. She did not let herself think about what would happen if she was caught. She climbed out. The drop jarred her ankles. She swallowed the sound that tried to come out of her throat and moved, along the garden wall, through the iron gate she had unlatched 3 days ago without knowing why, as if some quieter part of her had already understood what the rest of her was only now learning. The forest road was half a mile east. She knew because she had walked it the morning after arriving, mapping Harrow Hall the way she had always mapped new places, quietly, without announcing it, storing the exits like small secrets. The night was black and cold, pine resin and frost. Her boots were not made for this ground, and she could feel every root and stone through the thin soles. But she did not slow down. Behind her, the lights of Harrow Hall burned amber through the trees, and she did not look back at them. She was nearly to the road when she heard the horses. Not Edmund's men. The direction was wrong, coming from the north, and there were too many of them. The sound rolled through the dark like distant thunder, hoofbeats on frozen ground, and then torchlight broke through the tree line ahead of her, and Kate threw herself sideways behind a fallen oak and pressed her back against the bark, and did not breathe. The riders came into view slowly, and even before she could see them clearly, she felt it. A pressure in the air, something that had nothing to do with wind or cold. A weight. The kind of presence that made the forest itself go quiet. There were 12 of them. Armored, cloaked, bearing no insignia she recognized. And at the center, riding a black horse that moved like it had never learned fear, was a man who made the others look like shadows. He was enormous, broad through the shoulders, his dark braided hair pulled back from a face that was all cut stone and controlled stillness. He wore black leather and crossing straps of dark harness, and over it all, a mane of fur at the shoulders that made him look less like a man on a horse and less like a man at all. His eyes, even at this distance, even in torchlight, were pale. Cold. Scanning. Kate had heard of Cassian Drevon, the way everyone in the Northern Territories had heard of him. In whispers, in warnings, in the careful way adults changed the subject when his name came up around children. The Alpha King. The one who had ended the Blood Compact Wars by walking into the enemy's Great Hall alone and walking back out again. The one who held the 7 packs not through ceremony or politics, but through something rawer and older than either. The most dangerous alpha in existence, people said. And he had just stopped his horse directly in front of the fallen oak where Kate was hiding. The forest was absolutely silent. She watched his pale eyes move through the dark, methodical, unhurried, the gaze of something that had never needed to rush. And she understood in the marrow of her bones that he had already heard her, that he had probably heard her breathing since she left the garden gate, that he was simply deciding what to do about it. His horse shifted. He did not. "Come out," he said. His voice was low, not loud. It did not need to be loud. It was the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed, not because it threatened, but because disobeying it would simply not occur to anything with working instincts. Kate's working instincts told her to run. Her exhausted, shaking, newly homeless body told her she wouldn't make it 10 steps. She stood up from behind the oak, her gray cloak dark with bark dust, her braid half undone, her chin lifted in the particular way it always lifted when she was terrified and refusing to show it. She looked up at the Alpha King of the 7 packs and said nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You're bleeding." She looked down. Her palm. She must have caught it on the bark when she fell. A shallow cut, black in the torchlight, welling slow. She had not felt it until he said so. "I'm aware," she said, which was a lie, but it was the only thing she could think of. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness. Something more complicated than that. He looked at her the way she imagined a man looked at something unexpected, not with pity, and not with indifference, with attention. "Where are you going?" he asked. Kate looked back once at the lights of Harrow Hall burning through the pines. Then she looked up at him. "Away," she said. "As fast as possible." He did not ask her to explain herself. That was the first thing she noticed, the absence of interrogation. The riders behind him were still, watchful, their horses breathing small clouds into the frozen air, and Cassian looked down at her from the black horse with those pale eyes and simply waited, as though he had no particular investment in rushing her toward a decision she hadn't made yet. Kate was aware of how she must look. Boot-worn, dust-streaked, a cut on her palm she was pressing against her cloak to stop the bleeding, her braid coming apart in the wind. She was aware that she was an unmated Omega without a pack standing alone on a forest road at midnight in front of the most powerful Alpha in 7 territories. She was aware that she had approximately nothing to bargain with and nowhere to go. She was also aware that going back was not an option. "I need passage north," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. "To Vel Marin. I have a brother there." Cassian studied her for a moment. "Vel Marin is 3 days' ride." "I know. On foot, in winter, alone." It was not a question. It was an accounting. Precise, without cruelty. "I'm aware of the conditions," Kate said, which was the second lie she had told him in under 2 minutes. She was not, in fact, fully aware of the conditions. She had a soft leather purse with enough coin for perhaps one night at an inn, boots that were already failing, and a letter from her brother that was 4 months old. What she had mapped out in the kitchen garden as a plan was, in honest daylight, or honest moonlight, closer to a direction. Something in his expression shifted again. Not quite amusement. Something adjacent to it, quieter. "Ride with us," he said. Kate blinked. "I don't know you. You know who I am. That's not the same thing." He looked at her for another long moment, and she had the unsettling sense that she was being measured. Not unkindly, but thoroughly. The way a careful person measures something before deciding whether it will hold weight. Then he reached down and extended one hand. Not an order. An offer. His fingers were bare despite the cold, and she noticed a pale scar across the back of his knuckles, old and clean. "Our route passes within a half-mile of Vel Marin," he said. "You can sleep in the supply wagon. No one will touch you." Behind him, not a single one of the 12 riders reacted. No surprise, no exchange of glances. Either they were extraordinarily disciplined, or the Alpha King had a history of collecting stray women from forest roads, and Kate found neither possibility particularly comforting. She looked at his hand. She looked back at Harrow Hall. She took his hand. He pulled her up with the kind of ease that told her he had simply not registered her weight as a relevant variable, and she found herself seated behind him on the black horse, her cloak pulled tight, the warmth radiating off him immediate and almost alarming after the cold of the forest. He smelled of wood smoke, clean leather and something underneath, pine resin and dark earth, a scent that felt less like cologne and more like weather. Like the forest itself had a particular opinion about him. He said one word to his riders, low in the old tongue, and they moved. The supply wagon was at the rear of the column, canvas-covered, straw-floored, stacked with sealed crates and folded camp linens. A young soldier with a cropped beard helped her in without meeting her eyes, which she appreciated. She was given a wool blanket that smelled of cedar, and told, briefly, that they would stop to rest the horses before dawn. Kate sat in the dark of the wagon and allowed herself, for the first time, to shake. It came in waves. The cold, the shock, the particular kind of grief that arrives, not when you lose something, but when you understand you never had it. Edmund's voice through the door, stripped of the warmth she had built her future around. "She trusts me." She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and breathed through it, and did not make a sound, because there were soldiers within earshot, and she would not give anyone that. After a while, the shaking stopped. She pulled Eli's letter from inside her cloak and held it, not reading it. She had it memorized by now, just holding the paper, feeling the worn softness of it. Her brother was 23, 2 years her junior, and he had gone to Vel Marin to apprentice with a cartographer 18 months ago. He didn't know about Edmund. He didn't know about the estate. He didn't know about the contract that had already dissolved their family's name into the Voss family's ledger. She had to reach him before the Voss family did. That thought sat heavy and clear in the center of everything else. She must have slept, because she woke to stillness. The wagon had stopped, the horses quiet, and gray pre-dawn light was pressing through the canvas seams. She climbed out stiffly, her ankles aching from the drop the night before, and found the camp arranged in a clearing among old birch trees, white bark luminous in the early light. Fires had been built low and efficient. Soldiers moved without speaking. The whole operation had the quality of a group that had done this so many times it had become muscle memory. Cassian was standing at the edge of the tree line, alone. He had removed the fur mantle. In the gray morning light, he looked less like a force of nature, and more like a man, which somehow made him more difficult to look at, not less. He was reading something, a folded document, his brow slightly furrowed, one hand braced against a birch tree. He had not heard her approach, or if he had, he gave no indication of it. Kate stopped a few feet away. "Thank you," she said. "For last night." He looked up from the document. "You slept?" "A little." She paused. "I want to ask you something, and I'd rather you answer honestly than politely." Something in his expression settled, a readiness. "Ask. Why did you stop?" He folded the document slowly. "Because you were bleeding and alone on a road at midnight." "People bleed alone on roads. You don't stop for all of them." "No," he agreed. She waited. "You didn't run," he said finally, "when you stood up from behind that tree. You were terrified. I could smell it. And you stood up anyway, and you looked at me like I was a problem you were going to solve." He paused, and something crossed his face that she couldn't name. "I found it notable." Kate absorbed this. "I wasn't solving anything. I had nowhere to run." "I know," he said. That made it more notable, not less. She didn't know what to do with that, so she filed it away and changed direction. "The men you're riding to meet, is it council business?" He looked at her for a moment with those pale eyes, and she had the sense of recalibration, a reassessment happening behind the stillness. "What makes you think I'm riding to a meeting?" "You have 12 men, not an army. You're moving fast and light with no banners. And you were reading a document that made you unhappy." She nodded toward the folded paper in his hand. "That's not a military movement. That's a political one." The silence stretched for several seconds. "Yes," he said. "Council business." "In the north?" "At Drevhold, 3 days east of Velmaren." She nodded slowly, turning this over. Drevhold was the seat of the Alpha King's court. She knew it from her father's old maps, a fortress built into the side of a mountain range, old as the pack system itself. She had never expected to come within 100 miles of it. She had also never expected to spend a night in a supply wagon belonging to the man who ruled it. "I won't be a burden," she said, and she meant it practically. No requests, no complications. She would reach Velmaren and disappear into it. "I'll be gone before your business begins." Cassian looked at her with that same careful attention that had unsettled her on the road. Not threatening, not warm. Something that lived between those things. A focused stillness that made her feel, uncomfortably, like she was being seen with more accuracy than she was prepared for. "Eat something," he said. "There's bread and salt pork by the eastern fire." It was a deflection, and she recognized it as one. But her stomach contracted at the mention of food. She had not eaten since noon the previous day, and she was not too proud to accept a deflection when it came with breakfast. She found the fire. She ate. The bread was dense and warm and tasted of caraway seed, and she sat on a low log and watched the birch trees go from gray to white as the sun climbed, and she let herself think, for the first time since climbing out that window, about what came next. Edmund would find her gone by morning. He would tell his father. Lord Voss would assume she had fled toward family, which meant they would look for Eli, which meant she had less time than she had thought. She folded the bread wrapper and looked at the gray sky through the birch canopy and felt the shape of what she was up against. The Voss name, their pack alliances, the legal contract that had already swallowed her family's estate. She was an Omega with no wolf, no pack, no title. She had a worn letter and a small purse and a gray cloak. She also somehow had passage north with the Alpha King. She was not foolish enough to think that was nothing. By midday, the column was moving again. Kate rode in the supply wagon with the canvas rolled back on one side, watching the forest change as they moved deeper into the northern territories. The trees older here, darker, the undergrowth thicker. She was watching the tree line when she heard hoofbeats come alongside and looked up to find Cassian riding parallel to the wagon, not looking at her, his gaze ahead. "The Voss name," he said without preamble. "You're running from them." Kate went very still. "I recognize the crest on your trunk lining," he said. "The one you left behind in Harrow Hall's east wing." She stared at him. "You knew where I came from." "Yes." "Before you offered me passage." "Yes." The word landed quietly, without apology. She felt a flare of something sharp, not quite anger, not quite fear. And then, beneath it, something she didn't want to examine too closely. The recognition that a man who already knew the answer had still asked her to tell him herself. "And?" she said. He looked at her then, just briefly, and his pale eyes in the noon light were the color of winter sky. "The Voss family," he said, "has been under investigation by the King's Council for 7 months. The birch trees moved, the horses breathed. Kate felt the ground shift beneath her even though she was sitting still. "For what?" she asked, though some part of her already knew the shape of the answer. "Fraudulent pack contracts," Cassian said. "Forged lineage claims, and the disappearance of 3 unmated Omegas in the last 2 years. He paused. Women with no wolves, no bonds, no one to ask questions. The wagon wheel rolled over a stone, and the whole frame shuddered. Kate looked down at her hands, the cut on her palm, already clotting, already starting to heal, and understood. With the cold clarity of someone who has just stepped back from an edge they didn't see coming, exactly how close she had been. Not a convent in the Northern Territories. Something far worse. She did not cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't. Not in front of him. Not in front of anyone. And she kept that promise by pressing her thumbnail into the cut on her palm, until the sharp sting of it gave her something concrete to hold on to. The pain was small and real and hers, and it was easier to focus on than the alternative. The full weight of what Cassian had just told her settling into her chest, like stones dropped into still water. 3 women. Gone. Women like her. Edmund had known exactly what she was when he found her. He had chosen her because of it. "How long have you known I was there?" she asked. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. Cassian kept his eyes on the road ahead. "We received word from a contact inside Harrow Hall 6 days ago. A servant who had grown uncomfortable with what she was witnessing." He paused. "We were already moving north when I found you on the road. You were coming for me. We were coming to extract you before the ceremony." He said it plainly, without decoration. "We were 2 days behind the timeline we wanted." Kate absorbed this. The servants. She thought of the woman who had brought her supper the first night, who had paused too long at the door, who had looked at Kate with something she had mistaken for pity. Not pity. Warning. A woman trying to find the courage to say something she ultimately hadn't said aloud. "She couldn't tell me herself," Kate said quietly. She was afraid of Edmund's father. She found another way to tell someone who wasn't. Kate looked at him. The hard line of his profile, the dark braids, the way he held himself on the horse-like stillness, was a decision he made continuously and without effort. She had 100 questions, and she sorted through them in silence, pulling out the ones that mattered most. "The investigation," she said. "The 3 women who disappeared. Do you know what happened to them?" A muscle worked in his jaw. "We have evidence for 2. The 3rd we're still building a case around. Evidence meaning they're dead. He looked at her then, and she appreciated that he didn't soften it. Yes. She nodded once, filed it, kept going. And Edmund? His father? Lord Voss has political alliances that have made prosecution slow. Edmund is a secondary concern. He follows his father's instructions. The root is the old man. Cassian's voice stayed even, but there was something beneath it, controlled and compressed, like pressure behind a sealed door. The council has been building the case carefully. One wrong move and Voss invokes pack immunity, and the whole structure collapses. So you need more than evidence, Kate said. You need testimony. He said nothing, which was, she had already learned, his way of saying yes. She looked at the road ahead, the birch trees thinning now, giving way to dark pines that closed overhead like cathedral arches. The cold had sharpened as they moved north, and her breath came visible in small clouds. She thought about Lord Voss's voice through the door. She has no wolf. No one will ask questions. She thought about Edmund's hand on her knuckles, the practiced warmth of it, and felt something inside her go very, very quiet. Not fear. Something harder than fear. I heard them, she said. Last night, through the door. I can tell you exactly what was said. Cassian was quiet for a moment. That would be useful. It would be more than useful, Kate said. It would be first-hand testimony from a direct party to the contract, someone they tried to disappear. She turned to look at him squarely. I want to be part of this. Not managed, not protected from a distance. Part of it. He held her gaze. You understand what you're asking. I understand that Lord Voss has spent months treating women like me as problems that solve themselves when no one is watching. She kept her voice steady. I'd like to be a problem that doesn't solve itself. Something moved across his face. Too quick to name, but she caught it. Not surprise exactly. That quality she had seen on the road, that careful attention, intensifying. There will be a formal hearing at Drevhold, he said after a moment. The council convenes in 9 days. If you're willing to testify formally, I can guarantee your protection and legal standing during the proceedings. He paused. After that, you would be free to go wherever you choose. I want my family's estate returned. If the case succeeds, the fraudulent contracts are voided. Everything transferred under them reverts. Kate felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but the shape of it. A door that might open. And my brother, Eli Ashford, in Velmaren, if the Voss family suspects I've run. We'll send riders ahead tonight, Cassian said. He'll be brought to Drevhold under guard. He won't be touched. She looked at him for a long moment. The fur at his shoulders, the scar across his knuckles, the pale eyes that watched her the way winter sky watches everything, impartially, completely, missing nothing. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not ungratefully. Genuinely. He turned his gaze back to the road. Because it is the law, he said, and because the law should mean something. It was not a romantic answer. It was not a warm one. But it was, she thought, an honest one. And honesty, after 4 years of Edmund, felt like water after a very long drought. She settled back into the wagon and watched the pines move. They reached the first way station by late afternoon. A stone building set back from the road, low and solid, with a stable attached and smoke rising from 2 chimneys. The riders moved into organized patterns around it, with the automatic efficiency Kate was starting to recognize as the hallmark of Cassian's company. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. Everything done as though it had been decided before anyone arrived. She was given a room on the upper floor. Small, clean, with a proper hearth and a basin of warm water that made her almost embarrassingly grateful. She washed her face and hands, redid her braid, and sat on the edge of the bed examining the cut on her palm, which was already closing faster than it should. She had always healed quickly. Another thing she had hidden, filed away as a small anomaly, unwilling to examine what it might mean about the wolf she had supposedly never had. A knock at the door. She opened it to find not a servant but Cassian himself, holding a small clay jar. "For the cut," he said, holding it out. She took it. Inside was a dark salve, sharp-smelling, yarrow and pine resin, and something else she couldn't identify. "Your healer made this?" "I did." She looked up. "I spent 3 years in the Eastern campaigns," he said, with the tone of someone providing context rather than boasting. "You learn to carry what you need." She opened the jar and applied the salve, feeling the sting flatten almost immediately into a mild warmth. He waited, which she hadn't expected. Most people knocked and left, delivered and retreated. "You could have sent this with someone," she said. "I wanted to see how you were." She looked up again. His expression gave nothing away, still that careful stillness. But the fact of him standing there, having made the salve himself, and brought it himself and asked without performing concern, sat with her in a way she didn't entirely know how to manage. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." Kate set the jar down on the small table by the bed and considered him. He filled the door frame without trying to. Simply the scale of him, the density of his presence. Everything about him said power, and yet he was standing there asking how she was, as though the answer genuinely mattered to him. She didn't trust it. She noted that she didn't trust it, and she noted why. 4 years of a man whose warmth was architecture, built to surround her and collapse inward. She was not going to walk into another room that looked like safety, and turned out to be a design. "I'm angry," she said, which was honest. "And I'm frightened for my brother. And I'm—" She paused, searching for the right word. "I'm recalibrating." He nodded slowly. "That's reasonable." "You're not going to tell me it will be all right?" "I don't know yet if it will be," he said. "The hearing is not guaranteed to go well. Voss has allies on the council. There are things I'm still working against." He said it without apology. "I won't promise you an outcome I can't guarantee." Kate looked at him for a long moment. "He tells you what is true," said something quiet inside her. "Pay attention to that." "All right," she said. "Thank you for the salve." He nodded once and turned to go, and she almost let him. But the question she had been holding since the road pressed out before she could stop it. "The servant," she said. "The woman at Harrow Hall who sent word to you." She paused. "Will she be protected?" He stopped with his back to her. A beat. "She's already been moved," he said. "She's safe." He walked away down the corridor, and Kate stood in the doorway watching the space where he had been, and felt, against every reasonable instinct she possessed, against every lesson the last 4 years had tried to teach her about men who offered shelter, the very first edge of something she was absolutely not ready to call trust. She closed the door. She sat by the hearth and watched the fire and made herself think clearly. Eli, the hearing, the Voss family's allies on the council, the testimony she would give, the words she had heard through that door, the way Edmund's voice had sounded without the warmth he wore in front of her. She would need to be precise. She would need to be credible. She had no wolf, no pack, no formal status, which meant the council would look for reasons to dismiss her. She would give them none. She would be so exact, so composed, so irrefutable that they would have no choice but to hear her. The fire burned low. Her eyes grew heavy. She thought, just before sleep pulled her under, of Cassian standing in that doorway, with a clay jar of salve he had made himself, asking how she was, and waiting for a real answer. She thought, that is not what I expected. And then, quieter, beneath it, the thing she was least prepared for. I wonder what he expected when he looked at me. The next morning she found out, accidentally, and it changed everything. She had woken early and gone down to the common room before the rest of the company stirred, wanting the quiet, wanting the space to think. The fire had been banked for the night and she was rebuilding it. A small task, something to do with her hands. When she heard 2 of Cassian's soldiers come in from the stable, speaking low, not realizing she was there in the hearthside shadows. "The king hasn't slept in 4 days," the younger one was saying, pulling off his gloves. "Revik said he saw him standing at the window again at 3rd bell." The older soldier made a low sound. "He won't say what it is, but I've seen that look before. The last time, it was the night before Valdenmere." "You think it's the woman?" A pause. "I think," the older soldier said carefully, "that the king found something on that road he wasn't expecting to find. And I think he doesn't know what to do with it." Kate sat very still behind the growing fire and stared at the kindling and felt her heart do something she had absolutely no instructions for. She did not mention what she had heard. She carried it privately, the way she carried most things that mattered. Folded small, stored somewhere interior, examined only when she was alone. It sat with her through the 2nd day of writing, through the gray noon and the cold afternoon, through the evening meal at the 2nd way station where Cassian's soldiers were careful and quiet around her, and Cassian himself sat at the far end of the table, going through documents with a focused intensity that made him look less like a king and more like a man running out of time. He hadn't slept in 4 days. She looked at him across the table and thought about that, and then stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it led somewhere she wasn't prepared to go. Velmaren came into view on the morning of the 3rd day, a market town set at the confluence of 2 rivers, gray stone buildings and red tile roofs, and the smell of fish and wood smoke carried on the wind. Kate sat up straighter in the wagon as they descended toward it, her hands tight in her lap, scanning the streets as they entered. Cassian had sent riders ahead the night before. She had to trust that they had reached Eli in time. She had to trust a great many things she had no prior practice trusting. They found her brother at the Northern Inn, sitting at a table with 2 of Cassian's soldiers flanking him, and a cup of something warm going cold in front of him because he had forgotten to drink it. He looked up when Kate walked through the door and went very still for a moment. The particular stillness of someone who has been frightened and is now relieved and doesn't yet know how to switch between the two. Then he stood up and crossed the room, and Kate walked into his arms and held on. Eli was taller than she remembered. He smelled of ink and cold air, and the particular papery scent of someone who spent most of their hours around maps. He held her tightly and said nothing for a long moment, which was the right instinct. "I didn't know," he said finally against her hair. "About Edmund, about any of it. I would have—" "I know," she said. "I know you would have." She pulled back and looked at him. His young face, tired and pale, his dark eyes that looked like their father's. "Are you all right?" "The soldiers woke me before dawn." He glanced toward the door. "They were very polite about it, but also very clear that I didn't have a choice." He paused. Is he?" "Yes," Kate said. "That's him." Cassian had come through the door behind her, and Eli looked at the Alpha King with an expression that moved rapidly through surprise, intimidation, and a visible effort at composure. Cassian acknowledged him with a brief nod that managed to convey both greeting and assessment simultaneously. "Your sister has agreed to testify at the council hearing," Cassian said to Eli without preamble. "You'll travel with us to Drevhold. Both of you will be under protection of the King's Guard until the proceedings conclude." Eli looked at Kate. Kate gave him the smallest nod. "Yes, this is what we're doing. I'll explain later." "All right," Eli said, with the careful steadiness of someone who had not yet processed the full situation, but was willing to proceed on the basis of his sister's judgment. She loved him for that, fiercely and simply. The road to Drevhold climbed east through increasingly wild country, the lowland forests giving way to dense highland pine, the road narrowing, the air thinning and sharpening with altitude. On the 2nd day, east of Velmaren, the mountains appeared on the horizon, massive and gray-white, and Drevhold materialized slowly from them, not built so much as grown, its stone walls the same color as the cliffs they rose from, its towers visible for miles before anything else was, Kate watched it come closer from the wagon and felt, for the first time since Harrow Hall, the full weight of what she had put in motion. She was going to stand in front of the Alpha King's council. Powerful shifters, pack lords, men who had known each other for decades, and who would look at an unmated Omega with no wolf and no pack and decide in the first 30 seconds whether she was worth hearing. She was going to tell them what she had heard through a door in the east wing of Harrow Hall, and she was going to do it with such precision and composure that none of them would find a single thread to pull. She was going to do this, and then she was going to take her family's estate back, and then she was going to rebuild. She had 4 days before the council convened. She spent them preparing. Cassian gave her access to the Hold's library, a vast, cold room with shelves that reached the ceiling and a fireplace large enough to stand in, filled with law texts and council records and pack compact histories. She read for 12 hours the first day. She read pack contract law and Omega legal status, and the specific statutes governing fraudulent bonding agreements. She read the 3 previous cases in which pack immunity had been successfully invoked, and then successfully challenged. She found the cracks. Eli helped. He was good at finding things in documents. It was what cartographers did, really, finding the precise shape of something hidden inside something larger. And together they built the architecture of her testimony, cross-referencing what she had heard with what Cassian's investigators had already documented. On the evening of the second day, Cassian came to the library. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the table covered in open books and Eli's careful notations, at Kate with ink on her fingers and her hair loosened from its braid, and something in his expression did the thing she had started to recognize. That small, contained recalibration, as though she kept being slightly different from whatever he had anticipated. "You should sleep," he said. "I will." She didn't look up from the page. "The immunity clause in the Valdenmere Compact. Is this the version that's still in force, or was it revised after the Eastern campaigns?" A pause. Then he came into the room, the first time he had done so, and leaned over the table to look at the page she was pointing at. He was close enough that she could smell the wood smoke on him, and the particular dark pine scent that seemed to be simply his, and she was very careful not to react to it. "Revised?" he said. "The current version is in the green binding, 3 shelves up on the left." She found it. He stayed at the table, looking at her notes. "You built this yourself," he said. "Eli helped. Most of this is yours." He said it without inflection, as simple observation. "You've found 3 angles of approach I hadn't considered." She looked up at that. He was reading her notes with genuine attention, his brow slightly furrowed, one finger tracing a line of Eli's handwriting where it connected 2 statutes she had identified. "The council will try to reframe me as an emotionally compromised party," she said. "A woman who nearly married badly and is seeking personal redress. I need them to see me as a witness to a documented pattern of criminal conduct." She paused. "These 3 angles make that harder to dismiss." "Yes," he said. "They do." He straightened and looked at her, and for a moment the library was very quiet. The fire settling, the wind outside the high windows, Eli having excused himself an hour ago to sleep. Just the 2 of them in the lamplight, and the smell of old books, and the particular silence of 2 people who have been moving in the same direction, long enough to have become, somehow, a we, without discussing it. "I want you to know something," Cassian said. And his voice was different. Not the council voice, not the command voice, but something quieter underneath both of those. "Whatever happens at the hearing, whatever the council decides." He paused, choosing words with the care of someone who rarely needed to choose them carefully, because he rarely said things that cost him anything. "I intend to see this through, not only as a matter of law." Kate looked at him steadily. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm aware that I'm asking you to stand in front of men who will try to diminish you, in a hall that is my hall, using a system that has failed women like you before." He held her gaze. "It means I don't take that lightly." She was quiet for a moment. "You feel responsible," she said. "I arrived 2 days late, You still came. Something moved in his face. Brief, compressed. The expression of a man absorbing something he wasn't sure he deserved. She studied him in the lamplight and thought about what the soldier had said. The king found something on that road he wasn't expecting. She thought about a man who made his own salve and carried documents that made him unhappy and stood at windows at third bell because he wasn't sleeping. She thought about how different it was. This. How entirely, disoriently different from what she had known. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer me honestly, the way you answered me on the road. Ask. Do you feel it? She kept her voice level, clinical almost, refusing to let the question be larger than it needed to be. The bond, the mate bond, between us. The fire shifted. A log broke apart. Cassian was absolutely still. Yes, he said. One word. No apology, no performance, no attempt to manage how she received it. Just the truth, held out plainly. Kate looked down at her hands, the healing cut, the ink stains, the worn cuffs of her linen dress. She felt the word land in her chest and spread outward, warm and terrifying, and she made herself breathe through it. I felt something, she admitted, which was the most honest thing she had said in 4 years. I don't know what it means. I don't know if I trust what it means. I know, he said. I'm not. She stopped. Started again. Edmund was very good at making me feel chosen. At making me feel like I was finally safe. She looked up. I cannot do that again. I will not survive doing that again. Cassian held her gaze, and what was in his eyes was not wounded, was not defensive. It was simply present, attending. Then I won't ask you to, he said. I'll ask you to watch what I do, not what I say. She held that for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, and turned back to the green binding with the revised immunity clause and said, The hearing is in 2 days. I need 2 more hours tonight. He didn't push. He didn't press the moment into something larger. He simply straightened and moved toward the door, and paused there. There's a wolf, he said quietly, that has been sleeping outside your door every night since we arrived at the hold. Kate went still. Large, black, tends to disappear before the servants come in the morning. A pause. I thought you should know. He left. Kate sat alone in the library for a long moment, staring at the page she was no longer reading, her heart doing something entirely outside her control. Then she pressed her thumbnail against her palm, the old cut, almost healed, and made herself focus. 2 more hours. Then the hearing. Then justice. Everything else after. The council chamber at Drevhold had been built to intimidate. Kate understood this the moment she walked through its doors. The ceiling vaulted high enough to swallow sound. The stone walls hung with the banners of 7 packs. The long table of dark oak seating 14 council members, who had all turned to look at her simultaneously with the particular expression of powerful men being asked to take seriously something they had already decided not to. Torches burned in iron brackets along the walls. The air smelled of tallow and cold mountain stone, and faintly, the collective power of 14 shifters in an enclosed space, something electric and heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm. Kate walked to the witness position at the center of the room, and stood there, and did not let her hands shake. Eli was in the gallery above, behind a stone balustrade. She had felt him watching her as she entered. She did not look up. She needed to look straight ahead, at the council, at the men who would decide whether the Voss family faced justice or invoked immunity and walked free. She needed to be exact and composed and irrefutable, and she needed to begin. Cassian sat at the head of the table. He had not looked at her since she entered, which she understood. He was the Alpha King presiding, and any visible connection between them would give the council ammunition to dismiss her testimony as motivated. He wore formal council attire, dark leather, and the silver chain of authority and the fur mantle that made him look carved from the same mountain the hold was built into. His face was unreadable. His pale eyes were on the documents in front of him. Lord Aldrich Voss sat 3 seats to the left, flanked by 2 of his pack allies, and he looked at Kate with the calm contempt of a man who had not yet understood that the architecture of his safety was already compromised. Edmund was not present. She learned later he had been detained at the border 2 days prior, attempting to leave the territory. She filed that away. Later, the council elder called the session to order. Kate was introduced. Kate Ashford, unmated Omega, former contracted party to the Voss bonding agreement, appearing as material witness. She heard the slight pause after unmated Omega, heard the quality of the room shift in that small way that told her several of the council members had already begun the process of deciding she was manageable. She let them begin it. She would dismantle it piece by piece. She spoke for 40 minutes. She had rehearsed it until it was architecture. No emotion leading, no personal grievance visible on the surface. She gave them dates, exact language, the precise sequence of words she had heard through the door at Harrow Hall. She gave them the contract clauses Lord Voss had referenced, and cross-cited them to the fraudulent lineage claims Cassian's investigators had already documented. She gave them the names of the 2 women whose disappearances were evidenced, cited the statutes that connected those disappearances to the bonding contract pattern, and then she gave them the 3rd angle, the one she had found in the library at Second Bell 2 nights ago, half asleep and ink-stained. A provision in the Eastern Pact compacts that made fraudulent Omega contracts not merely a civil matter, but a criminal violation of the King's law, punishable without recourse to Pact immunity. The immunity clause did not apply. She explained exactly why. She cited the revised Valdenmere Compact. She cited 3 precedents. She did not raise her voice once. When she finished, the chamber was quiet. Lord Voss's composure had not broken. He was too experienced for that. But his 2 allies were conferring in low voices, and the council elder was reading the statute she had cited with an expression that had shifted from indifferent to concentrated. 2 of the council members were already asking questions, not of her but of each other, rapidly, and one of them had turned to look at Cassian. Cassian was looking at Kate, not with the formal blankness of the presiding authority, with something else. Quiet, intense, private in a room full of people. The look of a man watching something he had believed in before he had evidence for it, and finding the evidence arriving exactly as promised. She looked back at him for one moment. Then she turned back to the council elder, who had lowered the document and was now looking at her with the full attention she had come here to earn. "I have a question for the witness," the elder said. "Yes," Kate said. "You state that you have no wolf, no shift, no inner bond, no pact connection." He paused. "How is it that you present this testimony with such legal precision? Who prepared you?" Kate held his gaze. "I prepared myself," she said. "I spent 4 days in the King's library reading Pact Compact law. I am not here as someone's instrument. I am here because 3 women are dead and I am not, and I intend to use that difference." The silence that followed was different from the one before. Heavier, more considered. The elder looked at her for a long moment. Then he called for deliberation. It took 3 hours. Kate sat with Eli in a small anteroom off the main corridor, her hands wrapped around a cup of something warm a servant had brought, not drinking it, just holding the heat of it. Eli sat beside her with his shoulder pressed against hers, not speaking, which was exactly right. At one point the door opened, and one of Cassian's soldiers, the young one with the cropped beard, came in to tell them the deliberation was still proceeding and to ask if they needed anything. Kate said no. The soldier left. The door closed. "You were extraordinary in there," Eli said quietly. "I was precise," Kate said. "That's different. You were both." He paused. "Father would have..." He stopped. "I know," she said. They sat in silence, and she thought about her father, a quiet man, a careful man, a man who had loved his children without the vocabulary to say so, and had shown it in small, specific ways. The maps he had brought her as a girl, the way he had always let her finish her sentences, the particular pride he had never quite managed to hide when she solved something quickly. He had been dead for 18 months, and she still reached for him sometimes in moments like this, still felt the phantom shape of his absence. She would restore his name. Whatever happened in that chamber, she would restore it. The door opened again. It was Cassian. He looked at her, and she knew before he spoke. "It's done," he said. Lord Aldrich Voss was stripped of pack standing and remanded to the king's custody pending criminal trial. His 2 council allies were suspended pending investigation of their own conduct. The fraudulent contracts, including the bonding agreement, including the estate transfer, were declared void. Every asset transferred under them was ordered returned. The Ashford name was restored. Edmund, intercepted at the border, faced separate charges. He would not be a free man for a very long time. Kate heard all of this in the council chamber, standing in the same spot she had stood for 40 minutes that morning, and felt the verdict land not with the explosion she might have expected, but with something quieter and more complete. A door closing on something that had been open too long, letting in cold air for years. She thanked the council elder. She thanked the investigators. She was composed and gracious and correct. She did not break until she was in the corridor outside, around the corner from everyone, with her back against the cold stone and her eyes pressed shut, and her brother's arms around her. And then she let herself cry. Not for long. Not dramatically, but fully. The way a person cries when something has been survived, and the body finally believes it. Eli held on, and didn't say anything except her name, once, quietly. That was enough. Cassian found her in the library that evening. She was sitting in the chair by the fire, not reading, just present. The green binding of the revised compact closed on the table beside her, the lamp burning low, the mountain dark outside the high windows. She heard him come in and didn't turn. He sat in the chair across from her. They were quiet for a while. "The writers go to the Ashford estate tomorrow," he said. "The Voss household will be vacated within the fortnight. You can return whenever you choose." "I know." She looked at the fire. "I'll go back. Eli will come with me. There's a great deal to rebuild." She paused. "The tenants need to know what happened. The servants who stayed deserve to know." "Yes," he said. More silence. The fire shifted. "I have been thinking," Kate said carefully, "about what you said in the library. About watching what you do." He said nothing. Waiting. "You sent riders for my brother before I asked," she said. "You made salve for a cut you didn't cause. You gave me access to every resource I needed, and didn't once suggest that I was using them incorrectly." She turned to look at him. "You slept outside my door as a wolf, so I would feel safe, and then made sure I found out about it indirectly, so I wouldn't feel managed." He held her gaze. "You were supposed to find out by accident." "I know. That was the point." She felt the corner of her mouth move, just slightly. "It was a very good point." He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice stripped of all ceremony, "I don't know how to do this carefully enough. I'm aware that I'm asking for something from someone who has very good reasons to refuse it. I'm aware that the bond is something you didn't choose, and that choice matters more to me than the bond does." He paused. "I can wait, however long it takes. I'm not going anywhere." Kate looked at him, the dark braids, the pale eyes, the scar on his knuckles, the controlled stillness of a man who was. She understood now, not detached, but deeply careful. A man who held himself still, not because he felt nothing, but because he felt everything, and had learned over a long time to be responsible with it. Edmund had performed safety. He had built architecture around her and called it love. Cassian had simply been present, again and again and again. Without announcement, without expectation, without asking her to perform gratitude or certainty she didn't have yet. She stood up from the chair. He watched her, very still. She crossed the small distance between them and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. And she felt him go carefully, completely still the way something goes still when it doesn't want to disturb the thing that has just come near. "I'm not ready to call it everything yet," she said quietly. "But I'm not running from it." He turned his head and looked at her. Close now, the lamplight between them, the mountain dark beyond the window. And she saw it, finally, without the controlled distance, what lived in him when he let it be seen. Not the king, not the authority, not the force the 7 packs obeyed. Something older and quieter. Something that had been waiting with a patience she was only beginning to understand the depth of. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply remained. Steady and solid and present, his warmth immediate against the cold of the mountain evening. The wood smoke scent of him settling around her like something she had known longer than she had. She felt him exhale slowly, the careful tension of a man who had been holding something together for a very long time. Releasing. Within minutes, the rhythm of his breathing deepened. She realized, with a slow and certain quiet, that he had fallen asleep. The most dangerous Alpha King in existence. The man who had ended wars by walking into enemy halls alone. The man 14 council members deferred to without question. The man whose name made grown alphas careful about how they sat in a room. Asleep on her shoulder. In a library. By a dying fire. She didn't move. She stayed perfectly still and looked at the window where the mountain dark pressed close and felt, somewhere beneath her ribs, something settle into place. Not with the bright shock of falling, but with the slow, sure weight of something arriving exactly where it was always meant to be. She stayed awake a long time, just holding the quiet. In the weeks that followed, everything was rebuilt slowly and well. The Ashford estate was restored, and Kate returned to it with Eli, who catalogued every room like a map being redrawn from first principles. The tenants came back. The servants who had stayed through the Voss occupation were thanked and kept on. The house smelled of beeswax and pine again instead of cold stone and fear. Lord Voss stood trial 3 months later before a full judicial assembly. The evidence Kate had helped build, combined with testimony from 2 surviving women who came forward once the case was no longer suppressible, was sufficient. He was convicted on all counts. His pack was dissolved, and its territory redistributed. Edmund cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentencing, which was the most Edmund thing Kate could imagine, and she found she felt almost nothing about it. Not forgiveness, not hatred, just the clean blankness of a chapter that no longer had any hold on her. Cassian came to the Ashford estate in the spring, not with a retinue, not with ceremony, with 4 riders and a dark horse, and the same plain manner he had always had, as though the distance between a mountain fortress and a countryside estate was simply a road, and he had simply ridden it. He stayed for 10 days. They walked the grounds and argued about pack compact revisions, and sat by the library fire in the evenings with Eli, who had developed a professional admiration for Cassian that he tried to disguise as critical analysis and fooled no one. Cassian taught Eli 3 cartographic surveying techniques from the Eastern campaigns. Eli taught Cassian a card game that Cassian won 3 times in a row before admitting he had already known how to play it. On the last evening, Kate and Cassian stood in the kitchen garden where her mother's herbs still grew. The same lavender and rosemary she had played beside as a girl, overgrown now but alive, filling the night air with something soft and persistent. "I want to come back," he said. "Regularly. As often as you'll have me." "You're the Alpha King," Kate said. "You have 7 territories and a council that can't function without you." "The council functions fine. I've been delegating more." A pause. Deliberately. She looked at him in the dark garden, the lamplight from the kitchen window falling across his face, and felt the mate bond warm and certain in her chest. Not urgent anymore, not frightening, just present. Like a compass that had finally been allowed to point where it was pointing. "Yes," she said. "Come back." He reached out and took her hand. Careful, unhurried, asking without asking, and she turned her palm up and let him hold it. The old cut was long-healed, smooth and faint. He ran his thumb across it once, as though he was noting the absence of something that had worried him. They stood in the garden a long time, not saying anything else. There was nothing else that needed to be said. Kate Ashford did not become a queen in the way stories usually mean it. She did not stand at an altar in silk and receive a crown. She did not trade one binding contract for another. What she became was something quieter and more permanent. She became someone who had faced the worst that could be done to a woman alone and without power, and had stood up in a stone hall and dismantled it with her own words and her own work. She became someone who had learned the difference between shelter built to collapse and shelter built to hold. She became someone who chose, consciously, with full knowledge of her own past and his, to trust the man who had waited without asking. The mate bond was completed the following winter, in the library at Drev Hold. With no ceremony but the fire and the mountain dark outside, and the two of them finally still enough to let it happen. She felt it close the way a long open wound closes, not painlessly, but cleanly, and with the certain knowledge that it would not reopen. Eli finished his cartography apprenticeship and eventually became the primary surveyor of the Northern Territories, a role that required him to spend considerable time at Drev Hold and to argue extensively with the Alpha King about the accuracy of existing maps. Cassian bore this with what Kate privately considered heroic patience. Eli considered it a professional collaboration. They were, she thought, probably both right. The Ashford estate flourished. Kate ran it herself, with precision and without apology. She also sat, at Cassian's request, and eventually by formal appointment, on the council advisory body responsible for reviewing Pact Compact law regarding Omega rights, a position that had not previously existed, because no one had previously thought to create it. She rewrote 3 major statutes in her first year. She was working on a 4th. She was not soft about it. She was not sentimental. She was exact and thorough, and she did not let men with old power and practiced contempt talk over her, because she had stood in that chamber once, with nothing but her own clarity, and it had been enough, and she knew now that it would always be enough. At night, in the mountain fortress, where the wind moved through the high windows, and the fire burned steady in the stone hearth, Cassian slept beside her with the particular depth of a man who had spent years standing at windows at Third Bell, and had finally, completely, stopped. He slept like someone who had found what he had been looking for. She understood the feeling exactly.